Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's really good to see so many people here today. We did originally have the numbers capped at 20, but we had a waiting list, a full waiting list, and some more people inquiring. So we just thought, what the hell, and we opened it up to everyone who wanted to join. So that's great. And I think we had about 40 odd people sign up in the end from the last minute release. So if you're just joining us, just a request to keep your cameras off and to keep your microphone on mute setting just until we go into the breakout sessions. Now, you will need to keep your chat box enabled as that will be your opportunity to contribute. Now, we've just done a test now and it turns out that I won't be able to see your comments as they go into the chat box. So Ed from Stunnick is here helping me today, and I'm going to ask him just to pick out a few answers as we go along. Okay, and later we will be going into breakout sessions because even though we are doing this in a digital and a remote way, it's still good to try and keep an element of participation into a workshop. Okay, so let's go back one. My name's Nicola, and I'm the founder of and CEO of a behavioural science consultancy called SOMO. And we've been in business about 9 years now, and our clients range from the Cabinet Office, Department of International Trade. We've worked with Highways England and lots of local authorities. And we've helped all of them to use insights and methods from behavioural science to design better policy, better services, and to encourage behaviours that are of benefit both to the individuals whose behaviour they're seeking to change and to society as a whole. And that's the realm in which we work. We're currently delivering the largest UK-based study, which is designed to measure the impact of embedded nudges. Nudging is a form of behavioural science, and that's designed to try and change and measure the impact on pedestrian movement in the urban realm. It's funded by the Road Safety Trust. I think Tanya Kadir is potentially here with us in the room today, and certainly Ruth Gore, who I said hello to before, who are both either funding or actively involved in that work. And if you're interested in learning more about that and what we do, then I'll be presenting on this work along with Tanya Fosdick from Agilicis as part of the Fringe at 2 p.m. on the 16th of November. So, why behavioural science? I suspect all of you will have heard far more about behavioural science these last few months than you probably have in your entire life. Well, behavioural science is about influencing human choice and behaviour. And I think what it's really important to point out is that everybody is in the business of influencing choice and behaviour, but they may not always call it that. As I said before, we work predominantly with government and the public sector, but our clients could just as easily be from the private sector. I could have a client who is a company who's trying to get you to switch from one brand to another, maybe from one cereal to a different cereal. I could be a company who's looking to engage behavioural scientists to increase the number of people who take up and then maintain a gym subscription. And if I was a little devious, I could just as equally employ behavioural scientists to help me make it less likely that the people who'd signed up would follow through on a desire to cancel that membership. I could have a client who's a casino who's encouraging people to spend more time at the slot machines by changing the physical environment that they're in. Or equally, I could be a government department trying to reduce compulsive gambling, or even a road safety team who wants a better way to encourage people in their locality to exercise caution and consideration on the roads. And that's because behavioural science is the science of human behaviour. And it's the best means we have available to us to understand, to predict, and to influence choice and behaviour. Now, it is science. It is constantly evolving. And there's new learning and insights that are coming out all of the time. But as disciplines, it brings together things like cognitive psychology, neuroscience, data science, and social scientists. And some of the key things it's shown us is how much our environment, our emotions, and our habits both shape and constrain our behaviour. And it also recognises that our everyday decisions and behaviours are not always as conscious as we might think they are, and a hell of a lot less rational. That we may be less informed, influenced by informed, rational, reflective thinking about what's good for us, and more influenced by automatic and habitual processing. So that's kind of the world that behavioural science inhabits. And what's been really exciting is to see quite rapidly the value of behavioural science has been recognised and acknowledged. We now see governments around the world embedding behavioural science in their governments. And yet just 10 years ago, the UK hosted the first Behavioural Insights team within government. So that's a massive change. I think as well it's important to point out that any company who's serious about influencing consumer choice and behaviour is using behavioural science to guide their approach and messaging. And these are just a few of the many companies who probably have a behavioural officer or work closely with behavioural science companies. So that's a little bit about the background, but we're here to talk about campaigns. First up, I want you to understand that behavioural science is not a silver bullet. It's just never going to solve every problem out there. There are some that are far more favourable to a behavioural approach than others. And the second thing it's really important to point out is that the level of success that you can expect increases when you use a diagnostic approach that's calibrated to fully understand the problem, the people, and the context in which it exists. Now, at SOMO, we use a diagnostic approach, and that is designed to uncover insights into the facilitators and drivers of change. We use a lot of experimentation, and we'll often conduct trials to test our hypotheses and interventions prior to rollout. And that makes it far more likely that when our clients eventually do roll out a behavioural solution, that it will work because we pre-tested it. We also do training. And if you're interested in any of this sort of stuff, then just send me a private message, or you'll have had an email from my colleague Rona about 10 minutes ago. Just either send me a private message in the chat or reply to the email, and we can have a separate conversation. Because today, this is about fun. We're going to have quite a bit of fun, and we're going to share some key insights from behavioural science that really have a good chance, if you employ some or all of them, in increasing the likelihood that your campaign will achieve the desired result. Now, this is where I should be able to see my chat box and can't. So Ed, what I'm going to ask you out there is just to pop into your chat box 3 words. I'm going to ask you to describe what you think are the 3 most important aspects of a successful campaign. Okay? What does the campaign need to do in order to be successful? Okay. Okay, Ed, do you want to just maybe just pick a few of those?
Yeah, we're just waiting. We've had the first one in from. Oh, they're rolling it very quickly. Hang on.
Okay.
Hold up. Come on screen. So first one, 2 words from David Newman, which are inform and impact.
Very good.
Other words like communicate, engaging, relevant. Ruth has said be seen, understood, and targeted.
Yep.
Another one, relevant. Visually appealing, logical.
Yep. Okay, let's stop there. Brilliant. Okay, these are really good words. These are exactly the sorts of things we would want to be seeing. I think being seen is so important, someone said, and relevant, that's about it being meaningful, and engaging people, that's about capturing your attention, engaging it. And all of these things are what I would say are your most important elements that your campaign needs to achieve. It needs to be salient. And that's a word used commonly in behavioural science just to mean that whatever it is you're showing someone is presented in such a way that it captures and commands their attention. So you've caught their attention. Meaningful. This is when your message or the mood that you create resonates with the viewer. And that in turn causes them to engage with the content rather than maybe looking and then moving on. And finally, you might have caught their attention, you might have resonated, they might have engaged with you in that moment, but there is a third thing that you need, and you need the message that you're trying to impart to stick. And ideally, you want someone not only to recall it, but to recall it when the time comes to act. And if we think about, for example, the FAST campaign for stroke, that's brilliant. Just by using the acronym, it gives you a really memorable way to retain and recall what is ultimately quite complex information. So those are the three things, and what I'm going to be doing now is I'll be going through each of them and picking out maybe one or two, or if we've got time, 3 techniques that you can use in each of them. Okay, so let's talk about saliency. So saliency is information that, hang on, have we done this one? I need to move on to my next slide. Okay, so saliency, getting people to notice and to pay attention. Because please remember this, it doesn't matter how important the thing is that you need to share with someone. It doesn't matter how clever your message or well crafted your call to action, because if the person or persons whose behavior you're looking to change just simply don't notice your campaign exists, you've failed from the outset. And fortunately, there are lots of tactics that we can deploy to get our campaigns noticed. Now, I'm not going to have time to go through each of these, so I'm just going to focus on the simplest of the 3, and that's visual saliency. But let's take a step back. So a few weeks ago, I was asked to have a conversation with and to guide an NHS trust. And what they wanted to do was they wanted to increase the uptake of the flu vaccination by their healthcare workers. It was particularly important this year because staff absence through flu is going to be potentially disastrous in the middle of a second wave of coronavirus. So we looked at the materials they were proposing to use, and they had a nice poster here. I think it was Public Health England created this, and the rest of the materials they're proposing to use, and we gave them some advice. And the advice was that if you really want your staff to pay attention, you're going to have to act in a way that may at first seem counterintuitive. This is the reality of how these things work. Often we'll get a poster. Often it will be in corporate colours. It may be displayed on something like this. This is what Public Health England share with their trusts and their CCGs as examples of how to display their materials. But the reality often is that this is how it's displayed. This is a nurse's working station. And unfortunately, that nicely designed A4 poster is now hardly discernible from the other posters on there, and not really standing out to something and alerting the people that you want to that it's really important to get a flu jab. So what might you do? Well, the problem we have is that often there's a reason why posters that are in your corporate colours, in the usual place you'd expect to put them, in the usual size, won't get noticed. And that is because as human beings, we are able to move around our environments on a form of sensory autopilot when the surroundings that we are in are very familiar to them. Now, it doesn't matter if that's in a hospital trust or it's people driving around their local neighbourhood. What will happen is the things that they see every day they will not be attending to them, they will not stand out to them. And that's a good thing because in a way, automaticity, the ability to do things on almost autopilot, frees up our mind to think about other things. It's a form of cognitive ease. And when that happens, what will happen is that our minds will filter out all visual stimulus in our environment that either does not aid or prevent us from achieving our goal. So we go back to the hospital trust. If a nurse leaves their post to go and find out where they can access an influenza vaccination, they will recalibrate their scanning mechanism automatically to attend to any posters or information that will help them achieve that goal. So they are likely to look for and notice that poster. If, however, which I would argue is possibly more likely in our day-to-day existence, their goal is to nip for a coffee or to go outside some fresh air, they simply will not attend to a poster that looks pretty similar to the posters they are used to seeing in their environment every single day. So from the start, you failed to attract their attention. Now, the good news is that there are ways of counteracting this. The exception to this rule is visual salience. And that is when People notice something in their environment that is unusual, that is unexpected. People are hardwired to notice the black sheep in a flock of white sheep, the red apple in the barrel, a car alarm going off in a quiet day. Because that is how we are alert to new threats or opportunities, and everything else will be pretty indifferent to. So think about how we might use that kind of idea when we're starting to design a campaign. And a campaign doesn't necessarily mean posters, does it? It can be all kinds of activity that road safety officers design or create to get someone to attend to the issue that they're looking to raise. So here is some examples that were really cheap, and I picked these because they weren't expensive. So we have done a lot of work with local authorities around the 20-mile-an-hour agenda, and in one local authority, I think we just yarn bombed. We got a whole community mobilised yarn bombing these knitted things in parks, and we yarn bombed all the trees. And another one, I think there was a protest or a march with children going through the streets, a projected roundel into a kind of really iconic building, and the one at the top, really cheap, it's just a wreath that was put in the middle of the city centre around before Christmas with the names of people you just wouldn't want to see. And people would stop, they would notice, and when you've got that, that's when you can start to have a conversation. So these are cheap, simple ways just to kind of draw someone's eye, to capture their attention. Now that's a road safety example, but I think this is a really, really powerful piece of work. These were 440 pairs of shoes, which were hung on the wall of a building in Istanbul, Turkey. Now, not only are these extremely visually arresting, but they're doubly impactful, because in Turkey, it's traditional to put a person's shoes outside their home after they pass. So you'll get their attention, and then you can have the conversation that you're looking to have. And with a bit of imagination, you too can kind of think about how you can deploy perceptual and even emotional salience to capture someone's attention. Here is a company that our creative partner that we work for, they were asked to design a range of materials to support a celebratory exhibition of an urban design company, Urban Splash. Urban Splash had recently received quite a lot of negative criticism, and they were cleverly kind of exploited that to create a set of messages that provoked and intrigued people writ large, using off-the-shelf light boxes, really cheap to execute. And to date, that exhibition has been the most visited exhibition at Reba North. So, you know, just think about how you use your visual to not blend in, go against the grain. Okay, so I'm only going to touch that one on salience, but if you are interested, there's lots of other things I can share with you, perhaps at a later point. I think this is the one that we're all interested in, really, isn't it? Which is, how do we make it meaningful? How do we resonate with someone? How do we cut through the noise? Now, again, there are 3 great techniques that you can deploy. I'm going to go through all 3. I think we'll fit that in. But what I would say is each of these is slightly more difficult to execute than the last. So let's start with the easiest, tailoring. So tailoring is a technique which is used in communications, advertising, marketing, speech writing, where the underlying message you're trying to convey does not change, but it is tailored to suit the needs, emotions, and motivations of your intended audience in order to make it more persuasive. So you want to think about the personal group you want to influence. How do they speak? We judge people based on how they present. We form opinions very, very quickly within seconds of seeing somebody. Do we like them? Are they a threat, or are we indifferent? So what it is important to dress in a way that, I suppose, would augment your relevance and your importance in a particular setting. So obviously we're going to go into a board meeting, we want to look slightly officious, we want to look professional, but that would totally backfire if we wore a suit, maybe for some community engagement. So you're thinking about how you present yourself. But really important to balance this with being authentic. In February this year, I was in Sweden, and I was training 30 NGOs in campaign design, and many of the attendees were from sub-Saharan Africa. Now imagine if they invited me back to their host country, and I turned up like this, in traditional African dress. I'm probably going to be perceived as pretty inauthentic, and it's going to have the opposite effect. It's going to act as a barrier. So it's just a little bit of common sense. Above all, be authentic. That's where things like co-design work very well if you're trying to use language of young people. Okay, let's look at the next one. Let's think about framing. So the key thing to say in everything, in any communications, is there's always more than one way to present information. And how that information is presented can have a huge impact on how the person receiving the message is affected by that message. So it's similar to tailoring in the fact that the underlying message doesn't change, but it's framed in a way that can make it more or less persuasive. And one of the simplest framing techniques we use is to reframe the message into either a gain frame, which describes what someone will gain from doing something, or a loss frame, which describes what someone will lose from not doing something. So, for example, we might take the issue of smoking, and a gain framed message at its most simple might say, you will live longer if you quit smoking. A loss framed message, conversely, might say you will die sooner if you do not quit smoking. So you get the idea. And something called prospect theory helps us to understand how human beings absorb gains and losses. And I suppose that the commonly held view to date was that people, all of us as humans, are more sensitive. We feel minor losses more powerfully than we do feel pleasure about minor gains. In other words, we do more to get out of pain than we do for gain. However, as I mentioned before, behavioural science is evolving all the time, and we're learning more and more. And one of the things we're able to learn, and there's been some great meta-analysis of studies that have been conducted into message framing, is that it's all a little bit more nuanced than we might think. And some new research in healthcare is showing that loss frames aren't necessarily more persuasive than gain frames. And when we look at those analyses, what we can find is some quite simple rules or conditions that show us where a gain frame message is more likely to be effective than a loss frame message. So I'm going to just let you read that slide for a second. So if you answer no to those questions, then a gain frame message is more likely to be more effective in a particular context. And there's also greater insight into people's natural predilection to be affected by a gain or a loss frame message. So current sort of analysis and research is showing that older individuals are quite affected by framing, but in particular, they're more susceptible to positive frames. People who are less numerate can be more influenced by framing devices because they're less attentive to perhaps numerical information such as statistics, and then therefore more reliant on how the words are framed or presented. And all of us are more prone to be influenced by framing devices when we are rushed, because perhaps we're just making a much more quick, instinctual decision. So we're not going to weigh up as much, kind of make our own assumptions or weigh up the costs and benefits. So very quickly, just going through these again, certain kind of conditions, I suppose. Are we involved in the issue? Is the outcome uncertain? So for example, in the smoking one, the outcome's really quite certain there, isn't it? You know, everybody understands that if you continue to smoke, you are increasing your likelihood of lung cancer or many others. So that's a very certain outcome of a behaviour. But actually, if it's a lot more woolly and less certain, then, you know, then it can have a different effect. The predilection for risk and detail and certain conditions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause now for 10 minutes, and Ed is going to pop you in your breakout rooms, and you're going to have 10 minutes to complete a task. Back in the room now, how did you find that task? Just need to unmute yourself if you're going to apply. Tamsin, you got...
Yeah, I can jump in. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Thank you, loud and clear.
Yes, we were slightly confused by the answering yes or no, so there's some slight kind of discussion around that, but we reached a consensus, so we decided to go for a gain-based message around the concept of enjoying many more years of independence in return for. So go to opticians, come out with a pair of new specs, and X number of years more independence. So that's the way we solved it.
Yeah, fantastic. Everybody else is coming back in now. I would also have gone with a gain frame message. Does anybody else want to maybe kind of feedback on how you found that, and whether you chose to go for a gain framed or a loss framed, and what your message was? Just welcome to unmic yourself and just pop in.
Sorry, go on. Okay.
I'll go then.
We went for a gain framed message on the basis that it was an older person and they were less involved in the eyesight and more involved in other health issues. But then the other two criteria were a bit conflicting about whether the outcome was certain and all that. So, but yeah.
I think the outcome's quite a tricky one, isn't it? Because in your insight, it tells you that they do understand what the impact is of poor eyesight on driving. So we could argue that it's reasonably certain. So they would answer no to that. But I think in the end of the day, I'd be inclined to go for gained, because you're only ever going to have so much information on the individual. So we know that they're not highly involved in the issue. They've told us that. Is the outcome uncertain? No, it's fairly clear what happens if you can't particularly see. We've shown that they do understand that, but they've not got a lot of skin in the game. They're older. The rest of the things don't apply because we just don't know. So working with the information that we got, maybe we want to do a bit more insight work, a bit more digging, I would favour, in this instance, going with a gain. And what was your gain?
Well, we came up with a number because it said like short messages.
Yeah, so just give us one for now.
We were thinking about eye tests can often bring up other health issues, which keyed into them being more concerned with other health issues in terms of like their future health and kind of thing. So we sort of went eye tests help you see more than the road ahead.
Oh, nice. Very good. Very good. And C. Evans, you did join at the same time. Just very quickly, did you go for a gain or a loss, and what was your message?
So we like everybody, we went for a gain, but obviously the task was to provide you with a loss. So we did a loss message, and then we switched it to a gain message as well. So our loss message was don't lose sight of your independence, and our gain message was keep a good eye on your independence, because we were working on the fact that overall gives them a much wider realization that their eyesight is significantly impacts on lots of social elements, going to the doctors, visiting friends, being independent. And great
work, because you had it's not a straightforward task to know very clearly which to go with. You had a very short amount of time, and great, well done everybody. Now normally if we're in a normal workshop, we'd spend a bit more time working through this and discussing it and sharing our thoughts. We don't have time for that, but I did think it was good just to do a little bit of a breakout and do something a bit more participative rather than just listening to me, which is what you're going to do now, because I'm about to reshare my screen and carry on with the presentation. So again, please bear with me. Ed, can you confirm what you see? Hello, Ed?
I can just see your screen again, so all good.
Just a single screen. Okay, yeah. So we've been through this. All right, I'm not going to dwell on this one too long because we've not got a huge amount of time left, but this is just an experiment which you can read through later, which shows that when you take a control, a standard message which just sets out a normal road safety message, which is switch off your engine when barriers are down to help air quality. If we tend to tweak that and tailor it into a self-interest message, we can see much greater impact. And I'm not going to cover that because of time, but it just shows. So we've talked about tailoring generally, understanding your audience, thinking about how you build empathy through dressing in the right way and presenting using the right language. We've talked a little bit about We talked a little bit about loss and gain framing messages, and you might want to test those before you settle on one, just to see which is the more effective with your target cohort, your audience. And the final thing I really want to talk about, and then the final thing that we didn't really touch on, is that sometimes you can tailor your message to self-interest. You might want to talk about benefits to health or family or financial, and they can all have a really powerful impact on how much someone engages with that message. So the final one is emotional salience. And I think this area is fascinating because there's been numerous studies that show quite how much we are influenced by our emotions. Sometimes that's guilt, sometimes it's love. But every single time that happens, it totally contradicts the idea of rational choice theory, which is that the whole model, the economics and many other behavioral analysis models have been built upon. Because what it's saying is we are actually quite irrational, and emotion can be quite irrational, but very, very powerful. So let's take a look. I'm going to show you a little campaign now. This campaign is from New Zealand. Listen very carefully because it's in quite a colloquial New Zealand accent. But I just want you to have a little listen to this campaign, and I want you to think about what is going on here, what kind of tailoring is going on, and what kind of emotions being used here.
Hi, Nicola. The volume's a bit low on the video. I don't think people can hear it.
Stop a mate from driving drunk.
Okay, I'm sorry I wasn't able to alter that volume, but essentially the scenario is a group of mates at a party. One's concerned that his friend, his peer, is drunk and he can't drive, and he imagines all the terrible things that would happen if his friend died, all of which were quite humorous. But at the end of the day, as you can see from that slogan, he intervenes, it's responded positively by the group, and he's called a bloody legend. So there's something going on there as well. So in your chat box, I've kind of given you a bit of a clue there, but what do you think was going on there in terms of the tailoring and in terms of the emotion being used? Do you want to pop them in, and Ed, if you want to then in a minute pick a few out for me?
Yeah, just wait for them to filter through.
Yeah, no problem.
So we've got comments like peer pressure, positive role model of the same age, guilt, keeping it humorous and using language to target age group, influence, being positive with messages, using target audience language. Yeah,
brilliant. Let's stop there. So we don't know how effective this campaign was because road safety is not very good at evaluating impact. But there are a number of things going on there, and I think it's quite clever. There's clearly a lot of tailoring. This is an Indigenous group. It's targeted at young men. They appear to be fairly impoverished. And I wonder whether there was some co-design done there to kind of make the language and the humour authentic. There's certainly a lot of humour going on. But I think somebody pointed out there's about this idea of peer pressure. And in behavioural science, we would call that social norming, or exploiting people's idea of what the primary opinion or behaviour of the group is, the common behaviour or opinion. So when we talk about social norms, we all like to conform to some extent, but teenagers and young adults are much more sensitive to being excluded by their peers or older adults. And if you look at it from a neuroscience perspective, this is because they have brains that are highly sensitive to rewards, particularly social rewards. So positive affirmation works very, very well with this group. And I think that's a great example of using humour and tailoring, and the ego as well, about feeling good about yourself and being special within the group. So all of those things going on there. Oh, let's not watch it again. But what's the opposite of humour or positive emotion? It's fear. And the argument about where the place for fear lies in campaigns has been ongoing for years. And indeed, fear arousal has been used since antiquity. We've seen it used by preachers and teachers alike. And all of them are doing it in an effort to get individuals to think or act in a certain way. Now, for a long time, the jury has been out as to how effective fear-based campaigns are. And again, there's been some really good studies, some meta-analysis of fear appeals, which have looked at multiple studies and pulled together some common insights from them that I think are really useful. And what it tells us is that fear is a great motivator for action. But, and this is the big but, it's only when certain conditions are met. So I've condensed these for you into 4 key ones. So fear campaigns are more likely to succeed when the magnitude of the threat level is considered high. Visual or messages that are used in that campaign evoke high amounts of fear in the person engaged with that campaign. You know, you don't shy away from strong imagery or language. And this is the thing that I think is really, really interesting and important. For someone to be motivated to enact a particular choice or behavior, they have to feel that they are susceptible to that threat. Their personal risk is impacted upon. And finally, because there's no point just striking fear into the heart of people unless you're actually looking for them to take a particular course of action, then the individual you are targeting needs to believe that they're able to perform the recommended response, and that if they do so, the response or the action that you're telling them to do will be effective in averting or minimizing that threat. Okay, quite a lot to take in, so I thought we'd work through an example. And I thought, what's more current than COVID-19? So let's just look at that. Is the magnitude of threat for COVID-19 high? Yes, it is. It's very high, and messages showing the kind of the level of threat have been used consistently, and I would argue equally as human beings, as citizens. We want to know that level of threat, and we are very kind of sensitive to any changes in the level of threat. And you can see that being shown quite simply here by this graphic. Threat level is high. Let's look at the visual messages. We've all seen images like this, particularly in the early days, and they were terrifying and frightening and caused us to engage our emotion very kind of powerfully, I think, with what the manifestation of that threat could look like at its worst. But what about susceptibility? Well, again, I don't know how clearly you can see this, but this is one I pulled out yesterday, and this is Manchester is showing a graph about the increase in confirmed cases against a national average, and again, very visually showing that people have increased susceptibility as the rate per 100,000 is increasing exponentially. So that's going to impact on someone's feeling of vulnerability or susceptibility. But what was great, if we can say great about coronavirus, was people, when they're in these state, very mass population level, we saw people adopting new behaviors, whether it's wearing masks or washing our hands. And the reason for that was that very much kind of people felt that these were things that were simple to do. They were able to do them. And if they did, they reduced their susceptibility to that threat. So there was lots and lots of things that some have changed, some have remained, but these behaviors stuck because people were engaged in the fear, they felt vulnerable, and there was something they felt they could do to protect themselves. what's really interesting is that where people do not feel that they are able to perform the action to avert the threat, they will not engage with it. And smoking is a classic example. A lot of the time when we get to this bit, the threat of death is certainly quite high if you're a regular smoker. Images we've seen of throat or lung cancer are horrific, but many addicted smokers do not believe they can quit. And so the effectiveness of those campaigns is stunted by that. And very often what will happen is people disengage and not recall, remember, or even avert themselves from those campaigns. So you do need to give them a simple, and it's called a self-efficacy message. Skipping through, we won't kind of go through this because of time. But yeah, 3 things you can do. Use your language, that's quite powerful. If there are statistics you can use to show susceptibility, do it, but always give people something we think that they can do, a simple thing they can do that will reduce kind of the risk. And I think I mentioned before that when people do not feel that any of those things are missing, then not only will your campaign not have the desired effect, but it can even backfire and create avoidance or reactions behavior where the behavior increases as a direct result to someone feeling powerless in the face of that threat. So they will subvert to doing even more of their undesirable behavior. And there's been some really interesting studies that we haven't got time to go into now, where they have put people who are smokers and people who are not smokers in front of videos that are designed to kind of change behavior. And when they've tested people who are not and have never been smokers, they've used eye tracking and they have watched and engaged with the video. They can recall the messages and will take that information away with them. However, when they studied the group who were smokers, what they found using eye tracking is they actually physically were looking away. They averted their eyes and they could not recall the images or messages that were in that. I think that's really, really important. Do not use fear-based campaigns unless you are really, really confident that all of the elements are in place and you know what you're doing. Okay, but I like to link things, and we're about to go for memorable. And one of the really interesting thing about studies that look at emotions in campaign is the fact that heightened emotion also increases attention and improves our memory. And even when we look at things like extreme emotion, like post-traumatic stress has such a profound effect that it can actually re-hardwire our brains, so that a simple cue like a noise or a smell or a sound will immediately take somebody back there. They will be back recalling the event that traumatized them and affect their behavior in a way that they are unable to control. That's how powerful emotion can be at its most extreme. And I think what's really interesting is that multiple studies have shown that when people are shown an emotional versus a neutral video, they tend to remember the emotional video much more clearly and retain the information for longer. But maybe veer on the side of humor where you think that's appropriate. Or get assistance if you're thinking about that you have got the conditions to use threat-based approach. Right, so we've talked about getting people to notice. We've talked about making it meaningful. Let's quickly talk about making it memorable. Now, what I would say is we have 3 minutes left. I think I can get through this in about 7 minutes. So I do apologize if you are time poor. I don't really want to rush this too much, but I will upload a recording of this video to our website and send you out the details if you have another meeting or something to attend to. Let's talk about making your campaign memorable. Again, I've chosen to pick up on 3 techniques: primacy recency, repetition, and chunking. Primary recency effect. I don't know if anybody's heard of this, but we all have a limited amount of memory and recall, and we all move things from one part of our memory into another. And when we are bombarded by too much information, what tends to happen is our working memory stops and we cease processing the information we're given. At its most simple, you will remember the first thing that somebody tells you and the last thing. And as we go through that, your ability to retain and recall the information decreases. Why is that important to you? When you're designing campaigns, the first thing that you show them or tell them and the last thing are going to be the things they are most likely to recall and retain. So exploit that, use it. If I were to give you a list of 10 numbers now, you might remember the first two and you might remember the last two, but you would struggle to remember as those built up. Your ability to process that and embed it into your memory diminishes. So primacy recency effect. And there's all kinds of variations you can do on that to increase the impact of your message by playing on those two insights. Okay, repetition. Everybody's always telling you to use repetition. I bet you don't do it as much as you could, but repetition is an incredibly effective way to embed a message in a way that someone will remember it and be able to recall it. And no one does this better than Boris Johnson. So I'm going to show you another clip. I don't know whether I can put subtitles on this. Let's just have a little look, because otherwise it's going to be pretty pointless. Let's see if I can do subtitles. Ed, can you just tell me how were people able to hear the last one at all?
The audio levels are quite low, but
okay. Well, let's just go for it because it's not very long. And what I want you to do, just so you're paying attention, is I want you to try and guess or count how many times Boris Johnson in this 1 minute 40-second video says either the words "take back control" or "get Brexit done."
This Parliament just refuses to get Brexit done. And this deal delivers everything that I campaigned for Brexit. We take back control of our money so we can spend millions more every week on the NHS or whatever priorities we want, hundreds of millions. We can take back control of our borders with an Australian-style points-based system so we can bring in people, whether they're scientists or agricultural workers that this country needs, but we can control it. We can take back control of our laws so we can do things in our own way, do things differently and better. Another Brexit referendum means more delay, it means more uncertainty, it means more acrimony and division in our country when this country is aching to move on. On day one of the new Parliament in December, we will start getting our New Deal through so we get Brexit done in January and put the uncertainty behind us. Let's make 2020 about the people of this country and not about its politicians. Let's get out of the rut of the last 3 years and get on with our work as Conservatives of making this country the greatest place in the world to live. The greatest place to start a family, the greatest place to send your kids to school, to start a business, the place that leads the world in clean, green technology and tackling climate change and greenhouse gases. Let's get Brexit done, my friends. Get on with our project. Sensible, moderate, tax-cutting, one nation Conservative, spreading hope and opportunity across the whole of the UK, and let's unleash the potential of this country. Thank you all very much for coming tonight.
So I'm so sorry to do that to you, but I chose this because this is a wonderful example of a Prime Minister who had an exceptionally simple and repetitive message that was tested and found to be effective. And he deployed this tactic again in the election. And look at this image now, reinforcing that with those same strong statements that he used, appearing all the time behind him. That was not an accident, that's been coordinated. Repetition, repetition, repetition. And he used those messages in every article, every media appearance, and every speech. So whether you love him or loathe him, whether you voted for Brexit or not, everybody remembered the argument for Brexit because it was the only thing the Brexit Party said. The main opposition, by contrast, gave too much information. No one could recall what they were really about, where they stood, and what they stood for, and what the benefits were to people. And you can do this too. So I'm not suggesting you become Boris Johnson at all, but decide on what your main messages are. Maybe just keep it down to 1, 2, or maybe even 3, and find a way to repeat these as succinctly as possible. Keep it to a few words and repeat, repeat, repeat. Never underestimate the power of repetition. No, let's not do that again. So finally, I'm sure you have all seen these before, and the power of 3. I took 3 things for campaigns and I broke them down into a further 3 things. I linked them to help you embed them by a joining slide. So that's really leveraging the power of 3. We are quite capable of remembering 3 things. We struggle beyond 5. So try to make between 3 and 5 points. Mnemonics, I can never ever say this word, but things like helping children to spell difficult words, people to recall quite complex but vital information. Again, I mentioned the FAST campaign earlier, and rhyming, song. A lot of sub-Saharan African health campaigns and messages use song, because these are all devices that chunk up the information in a way that aids mental processing. So again, really, really useful to not sniff at something that rhymes, the power of 3, or something that kind of you can put together to make a word. It helps the brain to process and chunk large amounts of information. So that will help it to increase your memory and the person to recall it. So we're at the end of the session. I'm really, really hoping that you got something out of this. As you remember, we've talked about saliency and 3 techniques there to make it more likely that someone would attend to your campaign. We talked about making it meaningful, making it resonate with somebody. And again, we talked about different techniques you could use to increase the meaning. And finally, we just touched on some simple techniques that you can deploy to aid memory and recall. So hopefully, if you use just some of these in your campaigns, play around with it, test it. You know, behavioural science always advocates testing the impact of your campaigns on people before you launch them, but these should increase the potency of your campaigns. So you should all go away now feeling really confident, really happy, going out into the world, knowing how to design campaigns that change behaviour, yeah? Well, there is a sequel to this talk, and that is the intention-action gap. So you've caught their attention, your message has resonated, the action you want them to enact is pretty memorable, and still your campaign hasn't had the impact it needs. And there's a simple reason for that, and that is called in behavioural science the intention-action gap. And what that means is when you've followed all of the things I've suggested to you today to increase the persuasiveness of your campaigns, there will still be people who you've absolutely ignited, you've increased their intention, who do not follow through to the action. And this is because people do not have the luxury of being able to do absolutely everything they are motivated to do. There are hidden factors, we call them points of friction, that lie between the intent to act and the completion of that action that can have a disproportionate impact on the ultimate success of your behavior change intervention. We often think of them as structural or access, but actually there are many, many things that relate to our social influences, our cognitive influences and behavioral that are hidden, but again, can have a huge impact on how successful they are. So again, there is some good news. There are lots of things you can do to detect what the barriers are and to reduce or remove them. And if you want to learn some more about that, or actually to spend a bit more time really going through some of the stuff we touched upon today, then again, pop your name in the private chat or respond to Rona's email, and I'd be really happy just to share with you some of the different things that we do to help people to kind of understand the value of behavioural science. So final thing from me, thank you very much. I'm just going to click out my presentation.